Good day, brothers and sisters. I would like to share to you an article which our sister from Bible Miner had shared on one of her videos. It was mind-blowing, so I wanted to share it to you, but I'll be putting the links on the comment section as well. The title is DNA Proof of Noah's Flood from Asterinch.com. This page provides good scientific proof of Noah's flood and also Adam and Eve. Genetic evidence for the flood, a human population bottleneck matching Noah's flood, Genesis or Bereshit 6-9, is glaringly obvious when our DNA is examined truthfully and logically. You will learn how mutations in both Y chromosomes and mitochondria DNA can definitely point to the 4 men and 4 women who were on the ark around 4,500 years ago. Plus, going further for the genetic proof for the first humans, Adam and Eve. The Y chromosome in mitochondria DNA, the sex chromosomes are named X and Y. Males have 2 distinct sex chromosomes, X and Y, and females have 2 of the same, both X. So the Y chromosome is passed on only from father to son. Mitochondria, these are little compartments inside each of our cells which house the components to produce the cell's energy. They have their own separate strand of DNA, separate from the main nuclear chromosomal DNA, and it's called mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. Since only a mitochondria contained in the fertilized egg are used at conception, mtDNA is only inherited from the mother. Males are therefore dead ends for mtDNA. Kindly bear with me. When DNA, which contains the sex chromosomes and mtDNA, are passed down to offspring, mutations, copying errors can and do occur. DNA receives over 100 mutations per generation, whilst mtDNA receives a lot less due to the size of mtDNA being a lot smaller than DNA, approximately 60,000 base pairs compared to approximately 3 billion base pairs for DNA. Because of these mutations, DNA and mtDNA have been slowly diverging, degrading from the DNA and mtDNA of our first ever ancestors, whose possible identities are about to be discussed. As a soft reminder, Y chromosome is passed on from father to son and mtDNA from mother to all children. What we should expect for proof of Noah's flood. To begin with, the first book of the scriptures, or Genesis, Bereshit, was written nearly 2,500 years ago, around 1,400 BC, by Moshe. There is very good evidence to support this. The documentary JEDP's hypothesis, which denies that Moshe was the writer and consequently dating the book to around 600 BC, has no historical evidence to back it up, as explained in the link. Genesis states that 8 people were on the ark, Noah and his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 wives. So, there should be signs of a population bottleneck in which humanity almost became extinct. How many different Y chromosomes were on the ark? 1. The 3 sons inherited their Y chromosome from Noah, and since it's only 1 generation down, mutations would have been little to none. So, there should be only 1 Y chromosome lineage today. How many different mtDNAs on the ark for offspring? 3. The 3 wives of Noah's sons. The scripture doesn't mention that Noah and his wife had any more children. So, there should be 3 mtDNA lineages today. These 3 mtDNA lineages should trace back to a single female ancestor, biblical Eve. Proof of this would be that the 3 mtDNA's lineages are similar. Due to the relatively high amount of mutations humans pass down to children, approximately 100 mutations per generation, and the flood occurring 4,500 years ago, genetic diversity in humans today would be consistent with thousands, not millions of years. Human history, not the age of the earth. The age of the earth is irrelevant. Hopefully you're still there. What we observe today from worldwide surveys of human genetics. The Human Genome Project was declared complete in April of 2003. One of its findings was that all humans have virtually identical DNA. They suggested that this is due to a population bottleneck in our past, where our numbers dwindled so low that we teetered on the brink of extinction. Y chromosomes are indeed similar worldwide. No divergent Y lineages have been found. Therefore, evolutionists acknowledge a paternal common ancestor, calling him Y chromosomal Adam. I believe Adam means man in Hebrew. There are indeed 3 mtDNA lineages found worldwide today. Evolutionists have labeled these lines M, N, and R. In a court of law, this would be considered inculpatory evidence. There is little difference between these 3 mtDNA lineages, so they must have originated in a single female who lived not long before the bottleneck. Evolutionists call her mitochondrial Eve. Eve or Ahawa means life in Hebrew. Since humans have virtually identical DNA, the genetic diversity is consistent with thousands of years, not millions of years. To summarize, recent genetic studies reveal 1 Y chromosome lineage, 3 very similar mtDNA lineages, and the whole human race having virtually identical DNA firmly matches the scripture's account of Noah's flood and Adam and Eve. It's important to mention here that evolutionists do not claim that the above evidence proves that there was only one male and or female alive at any point in the past. This is explained shortly. Proof of Noah's flood mtDNA. Here is one source of proof for the 3 mtDNA lineages, which will probably surprise you for 2 reasons. First, it comes from evolutionary scientists, and second, the scriptural scenario is surprisingly easy to see. Just look at the lineage or lineage perspective tree after the introductory paragraphs. Time effectively runs from left to right. At the top is the lineage evolutionists call L, mitochondrial Eve. You can plainly see the 3 main lineages that appear further down, M, N, and R, which all have their own derivatives under them, caused by mutations passed down through the generations. Interestingly, R is under N, which could mean that 2 of the 3 wives on the ark were related, possibly cousins. Proof of Noah's flood Y chromosome. And there's the link. In human genetics, Y chromosomal Adam or YRMRCA is the most recent common ancestor from whom all living people are descended patrilineally, tracing back only along the paternal lines of their family tree. Recent studies report that Y chromosomal Adam lived as early as around 142,000 years ago. Older studies estimated YMRCA as recent as 60,000 years ago. Y chromosomal Adam is named after the biblical Adam. This may lead to a misconception that he was the only human male alive during his time, even though he coexisted with other human males, including perhaps his own father, who was not the most recent. However, unlike himself and his paternal line, each of his male contemporaries failed to produce a direct and broken male line to all males living today. What evolutionists make of this data? The evolutionary explanations for the above data are contradictory and confusing to say the least, depending on which genes they use in their research. Different bottlenecks ranging from 2 million years ago to 60,000 years ago are proposed. On top of these, they're also proposing different bottlenecks for males and females. Example, a male bottleneck around 142,000 years ago and a different bottleneck for females around 200,000 years ago. For the sake of simplicity, here's a general take on their beliefs concerning the required bottlenecking. There was a population bottleneck in which humanity almost became extinct about 70,000 years ago. The population became as low as 1,000 to 10,000. Even though many women made up these numbers during the bottleneck, only the lineage of one of them, dubbed as mitochondrial Eve, survived. All the other mtDNA lineages ended in dead ends, childless couples or boys-only families. What are the odds of this happening? In much the same way, only one Y chromosome lineage survived from a single male, dubbed the Y chromosomal Adam. All other Y lineages ended in dead ends, childless couples or girls-only families. Again, what are the odds of this happening? Then imagine what the odds are for both male and female lineages suffering the same fate. Alternatively, how about there was actually only one male and female in the beginning? Another theory suggests a long bottlenecking wherein the population dropped to 2,000 and remained at that population for at least 100,000 years ago. Credible? How evolutionists apply long timelines? You're probably thinking something like the evolutionists are stating tens to hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years of human history. How can it be just thousands of years instead? Well, evolutionists base their dates on evolutionary assumptions. They assume that evolution is true that to start with, and so they assume that the fossil record represents millions to billions of years of history. Bacteria evolving upwards through worms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals, primates and us. With this timeline in mind, they calibrate everything to fit to this timeline. They use an idea called molecular clocks, that there is a fixed rate of mutations per year in any population. How do they know what this rate is? They calculate it by using evolutionary assumptions, as I mentioned above, based on their interpretation of the fossil record. For example, they believe that humans and baboons shared a common ancestor X years ago. So they look at humans' mtDNA and at baboons' mtDNA and get the number of differences between the two, which is Y. Then the mutation rate per year would be Y over X. This type of logic has resulted in estimates for when their mitochondrial Eve lived to be between 70,000 to 800,000 years ago. As you can see, molecular clocks are derived from the assumption that evolution is true and that we're related to baboons, chimps, etc. There's no actual measurement of hundreds of thousands of years. With their timeline in mind, the fossil record represents millions of years of separate catastrophic events, local floods, extinctions, volcanic flows, earthquakes, etc. Whereas under the creation model, most of these events occurred during and after the flood. New analysis points to a recent human genome. The following paper came out not that long ago, January of 2013, throwing the idea that humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years if you include earlier ancestors into question. The 10th of January 2013, analysis of 6,515 exomes reveals the recent origin of most human protein coding variants, and the link was shared. A couple of excerpts, SNV or single nucleotide variant equals to 1 mutation per copying error. Large-scale surveys of human genetic variation have reported signatures of recent explosive population growth, notable for an excess of rare genetic variants, suggesting that many mutations arose recently. We estimate that approximately 73% of all protein-coding SNVs and approximately 86% of SNVs predicted to be deleterious arose in the past 5,000 to 10,000 years. What this is basically saying is most mutations in humans occurred in the last 5,000 to 10,000 years. Obviously, this was not expected by evolutionists who believe that humans have been around for 200,000 to millions of years. If evolution is to be believed, then for hundreds of thousands of years, or a few million years, the human DNA hardly received any mutations. Then in the last few thousand years, most of the DNA damage we've all inherited occurred. Sound feasible? Or how about this? There was simply no human history prior to a few thousand years ago. As you'll recall from above regarding molecular clocks, that evolutionists assume that there is set mutation rates per year and use that rate to date our supposed ancestors. Some might say that these new findings have thrown the molecular clocks into the bin. Declining human lifespan, Noah's descendants. If you look at the lifespans of Noah's descendants after the flood, about 4,500 years ago, they decreased exponentially, specifically fast at first, then more gradually. Noah lived to 950, his son Shem 600, then Arphaxad 438, Shelah 433, Eber 464, Peleg 230, Ru 239, Serug 230, Nahor 148, Terah 205, Abraham 175, and so on. On a graph, it's an exponential decay pattern. It looks very typical to many decay patterns seen in biology, a biological decay curve. This is to be expected if a recent human history is true, beginning with Adam and Eve, created with perfect genomes, which have been degenerating since then due to constant deleterious mutations, proven by the recent study mentioned above. It can be assumed that the decline in genome fitness would have taken life expectancy down with it. Genesis or Bereshit was written nearly 2,500 years ago by Moshe. Therefore, to refute this, atheists will have to either believe that the lifespan drop recorded in the scriptures that exactly matches a biological decay curve is just a coincidence, or the writer of Genesis or Bereshit fabricated the data using sophisticated math instead of a simple linear decrease. Though logically, if someone was writing fiction, surely they would have chosen believable lifespans of under 100 years for all of them. This was actually a personal revelation for me. Prior to understanding genetics, I wondered why scriptural men lived to ridiculously old ages. It didn't make any sense at all, and in my mind hurt the scripture's credibility. Now that I understand genetics and the harm that mutations do, and that the first humans had to have perfect genes, the lifespans decreasing from abnormally high ages not only makes complete sense, but is a huge boost to the scripture's credibility. What better confirmation is there than new scientific research solving a long-held problem? Logically, the truth is much more likely to be that the facts presented so far, our DNA, Y chromosome, mtDNA, recent human genome, etc., is proof of Noah's flood and that Moshe recorded the lifespan of Noah's descendants accurately, further backing up that the flood recorded in the book of Genesis or Bereshit is true. But is the flood and Noah's Ark story really believable? Yes, for example, the Ark could have housed 125,280 sheep. All animals were small juveniles. Most would have hibernated, and they came to the Ark themselves. Genesis or Bereshit 7 verse 15. Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the Ark. What about Cain's wife, inbreeding, and modern human diversity? Three of the many objections to biblical creation are: where did Cain get his wife, inbreeding causing deformities, and the human diversity we see today? The answer for inbreeding is easily answered. The most important factor for the negative effects of inbreeding is the number of genetic defects in the population. Deformities occur when both parents have the same defective gene. If organisms do not have any genetic defects, there is no problem with inbreeding. Since Adam and Eve were created with perfect genomes with no genetic defects, their offspring would not have suffered from the ill effects of inbreeding like we would today. Due to our very imperfect genetics we've inherited from generations of mutations, the same case would have been for the created animals and plants. Also, at the time of Noah's flood, human genomes were obviously less perfect, but at 4,500 years ago, much less mutated than they are today. Also, Noah's son's 3 wives would have helped with genetic diversity. Does this excuse incest? No, initially, Elohim or Yahuwah permitted intermarriage between close relatives in order to commence humanity. Then after about 2,500 years after the flood and in the time of Moshe, the generative mutations in our DNA would have accumulated to a dangerous level. So Elohim brought in the laws forbidding close relative marriage, Leviticus or Vayikra 18:20. Who was Cain's wife? Even though only Cain, Abel, and Seth are mentioned by name, the Bible clearly states that Adam and Eve had more sons and daughters. In Genesis chapter 5 verse 4, after Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. So Cain's wife was most likely his sister, and as mentioned above, this was okay both biologically and morally, and we're not talking about now. Can today's human diversity come from just 3 couples? This is another common argument against the scriptural flood, and is made without considering that humans were created with perfect genomes, rich in genetic diversity. The 3 couples on the ark had a great deal more genetic information than we have today. For proof of this, look no further than domestic dogs. All breeds of dogs have descended from a wolf-like ancestor, which had all genetic information for all the dog breeds of today in its genome. Through breeding and artificial selection, information was lost, redistributed, and concentrated, not added to. From the Chihuahua to the Poodle to the Great Dane, all these traits were in the wolf-like ancestor. Like all the traits in humans today were in the genomes of Adam and Eve. By the way, evolution cannot explain why wolves had all this genetic diversity in the first place, but creation obviously can. The creation model clearly explains where the genetic diversity in all plants, animals, and humans came from and why there were no problems with inbreeding. On the other hand, if evolution is true and all organisms evolve upwards via mutations, what explanation can evolutionists give as to why for every organism's offspring weren't all deformed? The fact that organisms can produce offspring which are not mainly deformed is a testimony to creation, not evolution. Hallelujah! As a summary, all humans today have virtually identical DNA, indicating a recent population bottleneck. New then 2013 genetic analysis found recent explosive population growth, suggesting that many mutations arose recently, which arose in the past 5,000 to 10,000 years. This logically dates the bottleneck to within the scriptural time frame, rather than the evolutionary 70,000 years time frame. Otherwise, there would have been virtually no mutations for at least 60,000 years, then suddenly almost all mutations. Illogical, plus it's contrary to the molecular clock idea. The Y chromosomes in all humans worldwide are very similar, indicating a recent sole male ancestor, matching Noah and before him, scriptural Adam. There are 3 empty DNA lineages, perfectly matching the scripture's record of the 3 wives on the ark who repopulated the earth. These 3 empty DNA lineages are very similar, indicating they diverged from a single female ancestor who lived 1 to 2,000 years before the flood, matching scriptural Eve. Eve's empty DNA would have diverged down through Eve's descendants for roughly 1,500 years, 75 generations. Then at the flood, only 3 lineages were taken onto the ark. The lifespan of Noah's descendants decreased exponentially. On a graph, it's a biological decay curve. This is expected if creation is true. Humans have a high mutation rate, passing down over 100 mutations per generation. This is consistent with a human history of thousands, not millions of years. If we descended from apes of millions of years ago, our DNA would have diverged considerably, 1 million years, 50,000 generations. Since all humans today have virtually identical DNA, evolutionists had to come up with an explanation for this. So a population bottleneck was proposed, actually two, for males and females, where only one female's lineage and one male's lineage survived to today, while thousands of other males and females living at the same time lineages died out. One lineage dying out is very improbable. Both dying out in an expanding post-bottleneck population no less is ridiculously improbable. This is just amazing, mind-blowing. It proves that we came from one man and one female, that in the beginning the scriptures was true. It also means that the end is true. We are at the end and our Messiah is coming back. What more proof do we need? Even Abba Father Yahuwah even put his name on our DNA. What more proof do atheists need? I hope you have a blessed day, and if you haven't accepted our Messiah Yahushua, please do now while there is still time. Shalom.